And we're live. Jeff, thank you so much for coming. I know we talked just a little bit about life and the way things are right now, but I want to kind of reiterate some of those things and just see what you're working on, like why people should be checking out your content, because they definitely should be. I found you because of my interest in Raspberry Pi and how I stumbled upon Turing Pi. Stan over there said, hey, you got to check out Jeff's stuff. And at the time, I feel like you had maybe 20,000 followers or subscribers on YouTube. And since then, you've just blown up. You're like at 100,000 now. That's crazy. Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it's been 2020 in so many ways was a crazy year in my life. But you mentioned the Turing Pi. I actually just like 2 days ago, I finally got this board, which is the production board they made.
Right, because you were using the rev or the test version or the prototype,
right? It was like their little prototype that had little wires soldered all over it, and it's like. But the crazy thing is one of the big highlights of my year was getting that board and thinking like, man, this is really cool. There's a lot here to unpack, and the whole story of how I got that board is probably a little interesting. We could dig into that, but.
Absolutely.
It changed my entire YouTube outlook. At the beginning of the year, I had a goal because I've been on YouTube since 2006. It's, I posted my first video, I think was 07 or 08 or something. And I posted a few videos here and there. And I was like, I'm never going to earn revenue. It's never going to be a big thing. But I do like sharing the things that I learn. And I have some video talent because I did a lot of video work in high school and in college. So
wait, what? So what makes you like sharing what you've learned? What is that? Is that just like a fatherly thing? Is it just, does it help you learn yourself, or what is it?
Well, there's two things to it. One is everything that I learned in open source software has come from what other people shared, like blogging. That's one of the things that I really am saddened about today. So many people don't have public free blogs, because it's all about monetization, and it's all about this and your books and your courses and your series and things. And most of the things that I learned about open source and PHP and Drupal and Linux and things like that came from open documentation, blogs, forums, and things like that. So it's paying it forward really is the main reason for it.
Totally.
And it's also just, I feel like when I can teach someone else how to do it, then I actually know a little bit about how it works. If I can't teach it, then there's no reason, I know that I don't really know it well enough yet. And there's a lot of, the old saying is those who can't do teach, but really the good teachers I've had in my life, all of them have the one thing in common, is that they know what they're teaching way better than pretty much anybody in the industry that they're talking about knew. Like, my favorite English teacher in school could basically recite, half of the works that he was teaching us about. And you could tell it because you see the passion that people have. You see the love for the subject matter. So that's my other thing, is I want to emulate that. And you can't do that if you don't know what you're teaching. So I try to do that with the Raspberry Pi things I do, and Kubernetes and Drupal. Although the flip side of that is that I always feel like I know so little, because you post something and then 10 people post things. It's like, oh, I actually worked on that code in 1987 and blah, blah, blah. It's like, that even though my knowledge is growing, it is so far below what I know other people know. It's just, I'm lucky and fortunate enough to have a platform and have the skill set to be able to share that knowledge in ways that a lot of other people don't.
Yeah. That's the understanding of it, and then turning around and being able to teach it. I've learned over my journey of teaching as well, that it really forces you to really have a solid understanding, because otherwise you're just reciting what somebody else has said and you're not really actually teaching. You're just kind of reading somebody's book or blog posts or whatever. I definitely appreciate that. And also the fact that those who can't do teach, which is like so funny to me, because some of the worst programmers I've come across can't really explain what they're doing and why. Whereas some of the best teachers I've come across can do exactly the opposite, just like you said. So tell me, how did you end up getting into the Turing Pi stuff? Because I stumbled upon it through, I want to say it was like through an ad or something like that, but it ended up being, I think it was through an ad. How about you?
Yeah, so it was a Hacker News post. I don't know how many years I've been following Hacker News front page. It's usually the first thing I open in the morning, last thing I check at night, and it's a really nice community there. There's some downsides to the way Hacker News is, but it's one of the few communities that hasn't pulled a dig or a Slashdot where they redesign and mess up everything they have.
Right.
So there was a post that had mentioned it, and I was like, that's kind of cool. Like I do a lot of Raspberry Pi things, and especially at that time, I wasn't like a Raspberry Pi person, and I still don't consider myself that, even though the past like 25 videos I've made on YouTube are about Raspberry Pi things. But but I thought it was a really cool thing because I'd been building these Pi clusters, and the thing that annoyed me the most was you have to put all these Pis together, and the Raspberry Pi, the Model B, the main one that most people have, is a really cool computer, and I have a bunch of them. I don't know, I have some sitting over here, but they require a lot of wiring to get them going. You got to plug in network and power at minimum, and maybe a screen and other things. So the Turing Pi made it so that you could take a compute module, which is just the little parts of the Pi that make it a computer. You plug those into the board, and you can build a cluster of them. And the first thing that most people who don't get it say is, why are you building clusters of Pis? They're underpowered. They're not amazing computers. You can build a cluster. You could buy some old laptops and stack them up, and you'd have a better cluster with way more speed. And it's more about the educational experience. Like if you can build a Pi cluster with 7 nodes, you can build a cloud Kubernetes cluster doing the same thing. And the cool thing about that is you learn the limitations with the Raspberry Pi. And when you jump into this like Lamborghini, you're like, wow, I have all this horsepower. Now I can go 100 times faster. If you start with a Lamborghini, you're not going to learn the same things that you learn when you have the limitations of a Raspberry Pi. So I saw that post, and these were the thoughts that were going through my mind. It's like, this is really cool. I need to see if I can get my hands on one of these. And for me, I really just wanted to see how it compared to my Raspberry Pi cluster that I had with Pi 4s, because this uses Pi 3, which is a little older, a little slower. So I found the Turing Pi site, and I found the contact email, and I just emailed blindly like, hey, I think I said like, I have this YouTube channel. That's always nowadays I actually have enough subscribers that might have some sway. Back then, I think I had like 3,000 subscribers. Something. I have this YouTube channel. That's my excuse for asking you, could I check out your thing and maybe do a video on it? So I did that, and the Stan from Turing Pi, who's kind of like the person orchestrating all this stuff and working on Turing Pi 2 now, which is really awesome. He said, yeah, well, we're still working on production, but how about I send you our prototype? I'm like, wait, what? This isn't something most companies are willing to do, to like go out on a limb with somebody who cold calls them and send
not at all
their prototype hardware.
Yeah. I mean, Stan did the same thing for like my story is identical to yours, except for where I found it. This is hilarious. I mean, that's why I think more people should buy it too. They're like actively trying to help YouTubers, understand and learn these things so other people can as well. But that's really cool that Stan took a chance on you. I can't believe you only have 3,000 subscribers. Yeah.
Well, at the beginning of the year, it was like 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers. And I had a goal at the beginning of the year. I wanted to get it to 5,000 subscribers. And I was like, I could make like 3 or 4 videos throughout the course of the year. Maybe one of them would get 2,000 views.
Was that the beginning of 2020 or 2019?
No, 2020.
Wow. So you went from 3,000 to over 100 now in the year?
Yeah. And doing tech, which unless you're doing review videos and have sponsors and things, it's typically harder to break in that area. And another thing that you might see with a lot of what I would call the more successful YouTubers, the ones who can grow in things, like I didn't just jump into this and say, oh, I love review videos from Marquez, or I love this, or what. I studied like, what are the ways that I could find a niche and get into it and still be interested? Because making YouTube videos, making what I would call good YouTube videos, not vlog style, like just hold a camera and talk to it and then cut some edits. Like making good YouTube videos is ridiculously hard, and it takes a lot of time investment, especially if you're an individual. Linus Tech Tips and channels like that have teams of 40, 50, 60 people. And you know, they have sponsorships and marketing relationships and people who like spend a day working on a thumbnail. I'm not going to have that stuff. So it's a big time investment. And I decided to make the investment for 3 or 4 videos this past year, I should say, because it's now 2021.
Sure.
So when I was thinking about the Turing Pi, I was like, man, there's more here than one video that I could do. So I decided to make a series. And at the same time, I decided to try out live streaming. This was before the pandemic started. So you're going to find a lot of threads of luck intertwined with all the success that I've been able to get on YouTube. But it was a month or so before I decided to live stream the upgrade of my website to Drupal 8 from Drupal 7, which, you know, the live stream got a few hundred viewers per stream, and it was successful by my standards, but it wasn't like a big success or anything. But doing that, I learned a lot about live streaming, which I hadn't done for 7 or 8 years. The last time I did it, it was like you'd pay a company to do live stream stuff, and you'd like send your stream to them, and then they'd take care of it. Nowadays, YouTube does everything, and Twitch and all these other platforms. But you know, so I learned about that stuff. I learned about OBS, which is an awesome open source streaming software for
absolutely
a lot of us use it. And I learned more about cameras, modern cameras, because again, the last time I did all this stuff, it was 480. Well, it wasn't even called 480p back then. It was like NTSC. You know, it was you have your American or your European standard. There wasn't HD video and all that. Yeah. So a lot of the camera stuff is the same, but the camera models and how to get the signal the right way and process it well, all that stuff I had to learn. And I learned it before the pandemic started. But when the pandemic started happening, the lockdown started happening, I thought, you know what? I know a lot about Ansible. I have a book on Ansible. And a lot of people are like sitting in their houses with nothing to do. So I'll do an Ansible live stream too. And that dovetailed in with the Turing Pi stuff because I was going to use Ansible to control the Turing Pi cluster. So all that stuff kind of came together, and I did an Ansible 101 series. I did these Turing Pi cluster videos on how to set up Kubernetes on your Turing Pi and build applications for it and all that. And it was just a storm after that. I blew through like 10,000 subscribers after the first 2 videos on the Turing Pi. And from that point on, it's just like, oh, I have a potential path to success here. So the rest of the year, I started figuring out how can I get some more videos out, and it's been a lot of work. Yeah, I'm not gonna like there's luck and there's work, and both of them combine. And one of my goals for 2021 is to get the work to be back into like normal work hours and not evenings and weekends and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, for people that don't know, what is Ansible? Because I definitely have people that aren't familiar with it. Because I learned from it, I think, from you and Network Chuck. So what is Ansible and why do you need it?
Yeah, Ansible is at the basic level an automation engine. So like I know for me personally, when I started moving from like having one server that I managed to having 2, 3, 4, I used to have like a bash script, or you'd have a run book, like a bunch of instructions in a README file, and you'd run those if you needed to ever rebuild the server. And you know, God help you if you did need to rebuild a server, because it wasn't going to go well. So I went from doing that to having like 4 or 5, 6 servers with one of the services that I had built. When I got out of college, I built something called Hosted Apache Solar, which is a search service that people can tie into their Drupal websites. And the reason I built that was because I needed a search server for my Drupal website. And I was like, I did it for me. All I have to do is add a payment front end, and I could do it for other people too. So the first few versions of that were horrible, but they worked. And I got a few clients, and I was like, oh, this, you know, it's profitable because it's, you know, SaaS is always going to be profitable if you price it right. And, but as I got more clients, I was like, ooh, I have like 6 servers, and this is not working where Jeff is logging into the server and running a bunch of commands for each new client. So that was around the time Ansible was coming out. I had tried a couple other things like Ansible, but it was really simple. And I know PHP, I know some Ruby, I know some Python, tiny bit of Go, things like that. And I could learn some of those programming languages if I wanted, but I didn't want to learn a programming language to be able to automate things. And Ansible gave me that. I had to know YAML, which YAML it's not a programming language. It's like a text file format. So knowing that, I could figure out how to automate everything that I needed to automate on my servers. And that's what Ansible does. You give it a set of instructions and it makes sure those things are run on the servers. And it has some cool features and things. And I have a whole course called Ansible 101 on it, if you want to check that out on my channel. But that was how I got into it. And since then, I wrote a book on it, and I did the videos, and I've done tons of blog posts. It kind of goes in with the education theme, though. The other thing I've found a lot of success with is when I am learning something, you run into problems. Everybody does. And, whether it's how to turn on a computer and the button is hard to press, like every single thing that you do in life that's new, you're going to bump into a problem somewhere along the way. And chances are you're not the only person in the world that bumps into the exact same problem. So one thing that I think a lot of people don't ever think about is if you just document that problem in a blog post or a video or whatever, a lot of people are going to be searching for that same issue and they're going to find it. And so that's one way, my blog gets a lot of organic traffic because all I do is I say, I hit this problem and here's the way I got around it.
Sure.
That's
it. That's great. Well, so going back to Ansible, just to get a better understanding of it, if you had one server and you needed it to be set up a certain way, instead of running a bash script, you would use Ansible and some sort of playbook, and then it would run against that server, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the great thing about Ansible is you can run it one time or many times as long as you're doing it the right way, and it'll keep it in that correct state. And as you go from one server to 2, 4, 10, 100, there are a lot of other things you can add on top of that to make them more manageable. But Ansible will help you configure things in the right state. And
Got it.
And I still use Ansible for Kubernetes and things like that. Even though the tools like Kubernetes do things for you that are magical and amazing, Ansible can still automate any process. So if you've like for me, it's like that XKCD comic. I forget which one it was. Like the little grid of like, how hard is it to do and how long does it take versus, how long does it take to automate? And I find myself in the middle of there a lot of times. And I'm like, I do the same thing twice a day, every day. So I can find a way to automate it, usually with Ansible. If it's anything that you do on a computer, pretty much Ansible could find a way to automate it, including your setting up your own computer or setting up, a Raspberry Pi or something like that. Interesting.
So could you use Ansible in combination, let's say Drupal? A lot of my audience is familiar with Django, but let's say Drupal or WordPress or something. Let's say Drupal, and can you use it to actually kind of make your own version of AWS or GCP? Can you use Ansible to do that? Where maybe you're using their server still, but for your customers.
And the funny story is that I actually built a hosting system that's basically that. It's a Drupal front end, which you could do it in Django, Drupal, WordPress, whatever.
Sure.
I like Drupal for the fact that it's between like full custom programming, which is more the Django model, or Ruby on Rails or something, versus WordPress is like, here's your house. If you want to turn it into a business, you got to knock out all the windows, So,
sure.
But anyway, I did build a hosting system at a former employer that is set up with a Drupal front end where people can go in and manage their sites that they build on Drupal. And then it uses Ansible on the back end to automate the server provisioning. And in this case, it actually managed a Kubernetes cluster that would bring up their environments for them, whether it be Drupal, WordPress, or some other thing. This was for PHP, so it was mostly WordPress and Drupal.
Interesting. So do you use any other tools, or would it just be Drupal and Ansible?
It was Drupal, Ansible, and Jenkins. Jenkins was Jenkins is like the duct tape that holds together the internet. Nobody wants to admit it, but it's that old Java application that has evolved since 2004, 3, 2. I don't remember when the original Hudson project started, but it forked to Jenkins and still runs half the internet.
Okay. Wow. So I'm incredibly ignorant with this then. What is Jenkins, and like how does that play into this? Because I'm more on the application side. I'm not doing DevOps nearly as much, but I definitely want to do it a lot more. And I feel like Jenkins is something I should probably know.
Yeah, Jenkins is it's at its heart, it's like it runs jobs. Like you give it a job and it runs the job. So Ansible actually has a built-in system for it too, if you pay for a subscription for it. But Jenkins comes out of the Java world. And in Java, you always have to build and compile your application and maybe deploy it somewhere, upload a WAR file or whatever. And it's similar in a lot of other programming languages. But now Jenkins is more used for, if you have an automated job, kind of like GitLab or GitHub Actions or Travis CI, as I will always remember the glory days before they shut down my access. But it's like a CI tool, continuous deployment tool. And it was very popular before all the trendy SaaS ones came out. And it's still pretty popular today. But so many old processes that you'll find on the internet are running through Jenkins somewhere. And I always have a joke that like someone's desk, underneath their desk is this old Jenkins server that's running like the backbone to Google or something like that.
That's funny.
Almost every enterprise customer that I've worked with, at some point you find this Jenkins server that is unpatched, running since like 2006, that's running one of their critical applications. It's crazy.
That is. So like as a web developer, would you recommend that they should be learning Jenkins and Ansible?
And I don't think so necessarily. I think for most of us, myself included, for projects that I'm working on for other people, I typically don't go the same stack that I use for personal projects. I have my golden hammer over here. I always have to remind myself, Drupal and Ansible and a lot of the tools I can use can become a golden hammer where, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all you use is Ansible, everything looks like an automation thing to be achieved. And there's a lot of great software and especially platforms nowadays that take away a lot of the grief that Ansible and other automation systems were made to solve. So if you're hosting on Heroku or if you're hosting on a certain service, and Amazon has like 25 competing services internally that will help you. If you can get all of your stuff to deploy in that environment and you're already paying for it, then I wouldn't throw anything else on top of it. But it can be worth it to learn, especially Ansible, just because it's so flexible and generic, and there's so many modules and such a big community around it that if you ever have to do something over and over again, Ansible can usually find a way to do that for you. And no matter what it is, if it's networking tasks, if it's building your application, if it's building a local environment or copying files around and doing things like that, all those things.
Interesting. That's really cool. I've become a lot more fascinated because of you. So thank you for posting and sharing all your knowledge about Ansible. I might need to pick up your book, Ansible for DevOps. It's just, to me, it's just too fascinating of a subject to not know enough about it to where maybe I'm not going to be working on it all the time, but just have a better understanding. Because for a long time, once I had something deployed, I was really, really hesitant to take it off and migrate it to another service. Because it's like this big black box. Okay, it's running. My website's running. I'm good. I don't need to do anything else. I'll just leave it there. And unfortunately and fortunately, there's services like Heroku. Heroku's great for doing a lot of these things, but then it starts to get pretty expensive. Yep. And you're like, oh, I want to move to another service, but what's going to happen to all of my things? Does Ansible help with migration in that case, or would you use a variety of other tools as well?
It can. I mean, again, it's if the task can be automated and redone, Ansible can do it. And I moved all of the hosted Apache Solr infrastructure. At the time, it was 20 something servers. I moved them from Linode to DigitalOcean, and it was only a cost cutting measure. I still love and sometimes use Linode for things, but I have all my hosted Solr stuff on DigitalOcean now. And I've gotten to the tier that now I get personal emails every now and then, like, "Hey, do you need help with this?" It's like, no, I don't need help. Sorry. But I did that migration using Ansible, and what I did was I built up a playbook in Ansible that would trigger a backup of each of the servers, and then but it would do it. The cool thing with Ansible is like you can build something one way and then you can tweak it and say like, I want it to do server by server or 5 at a time or all of them at a time. And there's a lot of other options you can do for how it does a deployment or how it does a migration or things like that. So I built it up to basically do a backup of each server serially, one by one, and it would do the backup. Then it would bring up the new server on DigitalOcean in the background while it was doing that backup. And then it would restore it to the new server. And then it would call out to my hosted Solar API and say, hey, this site's now on the new server. So it would just switch everything over in the back end. And it was only like 3 or 4 minutes downtime for each server, which was awesome. Yeah. There are ways that you can get that even better. And, there are some DevOps people who are like, oh, we need that 99.9999999. It's like, that's dumb in my mind. Even the biggest enterprise customers I've ever worked with, they're willing to, well, they might not say they're willing to accept less than 5 nines and all that, but they're willing to, because if you want that, the budgets for that are absolutely astronomical. So I'm okay with having, a few minutes of downtime while I'm doing a migration or doing an upgrade or something like that.
Right. It's interesting because you look at some services, they love to promote the nines. And if you're not familiar with what do you mean by 5 nines, what does that even mean? And also, do you have a list of all of the DevOps jargon somewhere that somebody can read about from your point of view?
I don't. It's a funny thing is the word DevOps in particular. When I started writing my book Ansible for DevOps, I chose the name Ansible for DevOps mostly because it was a hot buzzword. I was just going to be like Ansible beginners or Ansible 101 or something, something along those lines. But I was like, man, this DevOps word is like Google Trends is off the charts now. So I put it in the title, and I put in the first page, like DevOps means a lot of things to a lot of people, but it's basically a marketing buzzword. And so many things in the industry are that way. I know, like, I'm pretty big into Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is something that most people shouldn't even think about or care about, but they do because they've been marketed so well too. But on top of Kubernetes, there's hundreds of things where it's like, oh, you need a service mesh. It's like, what's a service mesh? And then you find 5 different vendors saying that it's a different thing. And, you find out that it's actually not what you needed because you had this one little problem and the service mesh solved it, but it also added 35 other problems. That's the jargon is impossible to contend with. And the only way to deal with it is to first put a little internal filter of, if I've never heard this word before, it probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but it might. And, maybe you can spend a few minutes figuring it out. But I've never tried to make any kind of map like that just because there's too much. There's too much. Just pronouncing the terms that I use day to day and write is impossible. On the YouTube channel, every video now that I post, they're like, "Oh, you pronounced M2 wrong. It's M.2," or "Oh, you did this thing and it's actually pronounced this way." And like the vendor names and things. It's like there's just too much in our industry to worry about it too much. I don't let it affect me.
Yeah, that's good. Well, the 9 nines or the 5 nines that you said, that's referring to uptime, correct?
Yeah, uptime, and a lot of people are, it's 5 nines is like the industry. If you can get 5 nines, and you're golden. 5 nines is I don't remember exactly, but it's like a few minutes per month, like 3 minutes a month of downtime or something insane like that. And wow. I run a service called Server Checkin. It's it's not unpopular. It's just nobody knows about it. So it has like, I don't know, a couple hundred clients, but I undercharged for it. So one lesson I learned from that is don't ever undercharge for a service, because then you can't invest back in it to make it better. But it's still running and I still use it. The main thing is I want to monitor my own servers. But since I've been running it, and I do monitor a few thousand servers with it, every single server, whether it's from AWS or DigitalOcean or whoever on the internet, it's going to have downtime. And it might be the servers having problems. It might be the rack in the data centers having an issue for 5 minutes. It might be the network connection, might be your ISP. It might be another server's ISP connection. There's like downtime is a thing, and you have to accept some amount of it. Now, an hour a day is probably too much. That would be right. Like 0 nines, but having a few minutes of downtime here and there, that's acceptable. I usually target, 98 to 99%. It gives me a couple hours to fudge. Yeah,
that's pretty good. So we've talked about Kubernetes a few times. Can you describe what Kubernetes is and when you'd use it and when you wouldn't?
Well,
That's a long, that might be a little bit long, but
I have a Kubernetes 101 episode, the first episode, that talks a little bit about when you'd want to use it or not. And the short answer is, if you are building a ton of applications on cloud computers, like let's say you're hosting 100 WordPress websites or 25 Django sites, or some applications that do backend big data processing, and you need to be able to manage them efficiently and have them restart themselves if they go down and all that kind of stuff. Basically, if you want Amazon in a box, or DigitalOcean in a box, or Google Cloud in a box, Kubernetes gives you a lot of that. But it's relatively complicated, and you already have to understand how containers work before you can be productive in Kubernetes. So if you don't know Docker, I wouldn't say to anybody that doesn't know Docker pretty well, like at least how to build and run and store and restart containers and things like that. If you don't know all that, don't even think about Kubernetes yet, because those are prerequisites. And there are some people who are like, our platform is built on Kubernetes. It's like, yeah, that'd be like saying my platform is built on super micro servers. Nobody cares that the server has a badge that says super micro on it versus Dell versus HP. There are a few people who care about that in the world, but generally that doesn't matter as much. And the big thing with Kubernetes is it manages lots of applications in cloud environments, and you can run it locally and do that too. But unless you need that complexity, I don't recommend it. I still run my personal website and a lot of other things that I run on VPSs. The one service that I do, well, I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm migrating it to Kubernetes, is hosted solar, because I run a few hundred instances of a search service that needs a certain amount of compute resources and a certain amount of memory and things like that. And it is easier for me to manage that through Kubernetes in the way that I currently have it, using Ansible and Jenkins and some duct tape. So there are a lot of people who Kubernetes is a godsend, but for a lot of us, especially if you're building web apps and things like that, unless you're building 50 instances of a web app, it's usually not worth the time investment to try to get everything into Kubernetes, because it's complex. And going back to that 5 nines situation, I've found the more complex the system is, like if an enterprise customer says we have to have multi-region failover capabilities, and the database has to have 3 backups in 2 regions and all this stuff, you spend more time dealing with those things and less time making your app simple and usable and easy and stuff like that. And your app is more flaky in the end. So you end up having to use those things, and those things are still really hard to deal with. And so you have more downtime in the end. So, hosted Apache Solar, which I've been monitoring for years now, has had like 99.99% uptime. And I have no SLA guarantee, but the people who use it, the clients that I have, are happy with it because, it's simple and it works, and it's going to be down here and there, but only for a few minutes at a time. And that's my philosophy on all the services and web stuff that I run, is simple is better unless you need the complexity. And when you do, spend the time to learn it well, and then something like Kubernetes is worth it.
Sure. So if I were to want to host, let's say, 100 students' Django websites, would you recommend using Server Checkin and Ansible or Kubernetes? Like
Kubernetes.
Got it.
In that case, because again, it's that trade-off. Like you're gonna need to do 100 things. With Kubernetes, if it's a similar enough thing, then those 100 things could be, you could do it in a way that's easily repeatable inside of Kubernetes. You might still use another tool with Kubernetes, whether it's Ansible or something else, to try to help automate the things that you do in Kubernetes, whether it's upgrades of those sites or whatever. But that's one of the cases where Kubernetes does shine. And that's why Kubernetes is really targeted as platform as a service providers, some software as a service providers, and hosting companies. Like those are the people that really it's made for. But I find a lot of people like, I'm going to run my Pi-hole server in Kubernetes. It's like, I did that in my video, and it's cool, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like unless you're on like Home Lab on Reddit, or you're already a network admin or a system administrator that knows this stuff. That's just adding tons of complexity to something that should be simple. Pi-hole is easy to get running on a plain old Raspberry Pi. You just install it and you're done. You don't need a cluster of Raspberry Pi computers to do that. But it is a fun tech demo, and it gets clicks, kind of like Ansible for DevOps, because the word DevOps in the title, it gets more eyeballs.
Yeah, I mean, coding for entrepreneurs. That's why I named everything that I did. And I also fit in that. I'm a coder and I'm an entrepreneur, so it fit with me.
I mean, as long as it's honest. I mean, it is for DevOps and
yeah.
it's Ansible. But that's the other thing too that I've found this year is like I as a developer at heart, it's been hard sometimes to do things like have a slightly more clickbaity title or have a thumbnail that bends the truth. I try to never break the truth. There's a lot of people who just go off the deep end and have ridiculous thumbnails and things on YouTube. But to be a good developer, you have to know the politics and the business side of things. And to be a good entrepreneur, I think I've learned you have to learn some of the marketing and sales and things, and you have to get out of your comfort zone. And I've had to do that a lot this year.
Yeah, well, it's working. Have you used I think it's OpenFaaS, FAAS, by, I think Alex Ellis is the one who did it. Have you had any experience with that? Have you?
I've installed it. I've looked at it. It's the whole function as a service. That's what OpenFaaS is, open function as a service. And Alex Ellis, he and I have chatted quite a bit because he's also into Kubernetes and Raspberry Pis and these ridiculous, crazy projects like I do sometimes. But the way that I have done software, the function as a service model, which is similar to like how Amazon Lambda does things, it doesn't jive with my mental model. So I never really got into it. The only thing I've ever done in that regard is email-based things, which for email, it is nice because email is very transactional. You check for an email, you get an email, you do something, or the email's delivered and you act on it. So notifications, things like that, work with that model. But I've never really been into that area of programming. So I was like, this is cool. And I've kind of moved on. But for a certain type of application or type of programming, that is a really neat tool. It's just not my wheelhouse.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I played around with it just a little bit. But the function as a service, I agree. It's like hard to like mentally put it into your workflow on how you're going to end up using it. And I actually feel that way about a lot of the no-code tools as well. Do you use any of those things like Zapier or?
No, not really. It's one of those things where it requires a different architecture, and if you're building something completely new, then it can be interesting to see what you can do. The other thing that has happened with some of the work that I've done is I have actually tried a couple things on Lambda in particular, where I was like, this would actually make a pretty good fit for that model, serverless, where it's still running on a server, but it's, you don't have to manage the server and all that kind of stuff. But I found out that it was more complicated to try to debug everything and get it working together as a system when it was kind of separated up into these different functions that communicated together. And there are tools to help with that kind of stuff. But again, it's like my brain and my style and stuff just doesn't jive with that. So I really haven't gotten into it, except for, again, notification handling.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So I was hoping to take some questions from people in the comments. And I'm going to let them kind of hopefully trickle in some comments now, because we will be taking some. One of the things that we've got here is, do you recommend someone use the normal route of education for programming, as in the universities, or being self-taught?
For me, obviously, I would be biased in favor of what happened with me. Is I'm almost fully self-taught. I in college, I took philosophy, mostly because I was studying actually to become a priest in the Catholic Church, and philosophy was what you took because that was your option. But I tried to get into literature and things that interested me. But my whole experience in college was I want to learn things. I don't, coming into it, I didn't have the illusion that I would learn a skill and that would be my skill for life. And at the time I was thinking about being a priest, like I said. So the options of careers were a little bit more limited in my brain. But as time went on, I knew I would not be doing that.
Wait, so how did you go from being a priest to doing all of the dev or software engineering and all the programming that you're doing today?
Well,
How'd
like
that
I said,
happen?
no, like I said, I was self-taught with all this stuff when I was a kid, and this was a big part of again why I like to do education and things like that. As a kid, my dad would bring home computer parts. He worked in radio engineering, and so you know, as I was growing up, IT was taking over radio engineering. It used to be like a guy sitting at a desk with some dials and knobs, and he'd be like turning things up and down. But with my dad's generation of engineers, they knew that radio frequency stuff and the towers and all that, but they also had to get into computers because everything was, you know, software eats the world, and it was eating the world of radio. So with that, he would bring home like scrap parts of old computers and things, and I learned to put them together. So I knew about the hardware side of things, and I knew what parts of computers would shock you and what wouldn't shock you. I learned about software from, you know, the cool thing that I remember from him, and I'm trying to pass this to my kids too, is he wouldn't show me like, here's how you do that. He would be like, I want you to, you know, like, here's this disk, it has a software on it. You can figure that out and have some fun with it. So, you know, I remember learning I would just click on every option until something cool happened. And then I would find other options. And you know, the first computer I had DOS. So I would just type in things until I figured something out. And you don't necessarily learn all the things that will help you in your life that way, but you learn how to learn those things. And a lot of times with computers, especially in programming, it's exploring. And I still, you know, right now I have a pile of junk over here. I call it junk. It's the Raspberry Pi stuff that I'm testing. And I'm learning new things about Linux networking and about the kernel and about programming in C, which is the language that I never really got into until recently. I'm learning all this because I'm like, this would be cool to do. I wonder if it's possible. And then I start there and go down that path until it's either impossible for me or I find a way to do it. And then I try to share that with people.
Yeah,
But,
I love that.
But anyway, so, you know, I started that way. And then in high school, I did some web development work on the side. And I was a referee for volleyball. That was one of my jobs. I was a maintenance worker at a golf course, and I did websites. Like, that was when web design was a new thing. So I helped a few small businesses with their local sites and things like that. And then in college, I thought I was called to be a priest. I'm a Catholic, you know, full disclosure. I think that's first thing on my Twitter profile. So,
yeah,
you know, faith is a big part of my life, and that's what I thought at that point in my life. But as I went along, and the point of the seminary that I was in, they'll tell you all the time is we're not here to make you priests. We're here to help you figure out what you're meant to be. And more than half the people that come into the Catholic seminaries, I don't know how other ones are, more than half actually end up leaving. And almost all of us that I know of, usually we become dads pretty quickly after that, because the nice thing that gave me at that stage in my life was being able to spend time thinking about who I am, what I'm meant to be, you know, what am I good at in life? And I found out that being a spiritual father was not that, but being a father could be. So I was like, I left the seminary and I was like, I think I'm meant to be a father. So immediately from that point, it wasn't like dating game. It was like, I want to find somebody to marry and have kids with and be a dad, because that's what I felt like I needed to be. So, you know, that was 10 years ago, and now we have 3 kids and another one on the way any day. So
yeah, that's exciting. Congratulations. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that about seminary. I grew up Catholic, but I'm more of a Christian now than a Catholic, I would say. Not that they're too much different. I realize that, but so I guess one of the interesting things to think about when it comes to, once you figure out what you're doing, for me especially, as well as you or anyone that has kids, is how do you funnel that with your kids? It sounds like you have some ideas because of your dad, but like, what are you doing now? Do they all know how to program? Do they know software? Or are you more of like just asking questions like, oh, why do you think of it that way? Like, how do you approach that?
It's funny, like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you do all this Raspberry Pi stuff. Your kids must all know all about computers and things. We didn't even introduce them to a computer until our oldest is now 8. We didn't introduce them until now. Like this year, we with the Pi 400, I was like, this is finally a device that I think is sufficiently limited enough, but also nice enough that they could learn computing. So you know, we limit screen time. I think the more you know about tech, the more you know about social media and what it can do to your brain and things like that, the more we're willing to pull our kids back. At least that's been my experience with a lot of parents that I know of who are in tech. And you know, they are learning right now. It's funny because I in high school when I was doing the web design, I also helped a couple elderly people I knew learn how to use a computer. And it's the same thing with a kid. Like, you hand them a mouse, and the hardest thing is to click. Like, you're like, okay, now click, but don't move the mouse. And it's like, this is the hardest thing. My 4-year-old cannot figure out for the life of her how to click a mouse without moving it at the same time. So I always have to guide her hand while she's clicking. The 8-year-old's getting it now, but we're, you know, we're slowly teaching typing and things like that. And I'm trying to take the same approach as my dad, where it's like, you get some time to do things, but it's also a guided time. And I'm, you know, no internet access for now. None of that kind of stuff, to let them explore and learn on their own, and then keep feeding it. Like, you give more interesting things and maybe a cool accessory and a webcam or whatever, and let them grow at their own pace. And the other thing that helped me a lot that I remember is, you know, I would ask for things a lot of times, but I wouldn't just get expensive tech gadgets and things. I had to work for it. So the first time that I had a camera that I could plug into my computer through a video card that I bought online, you know, it was on eBay or something. It wasn't eBay. I had to find this video capture card that worked with my computer and let my camera go in. I learned how to edit video using whatever, like 1.0 version of Avid or something. And but it was so special because I remember that was like a summer's worth of work to earn the money to buy that video card to do that thing. So similarly, you know, I don't want to just, I have a lot of things that I could just heap on my kids and be like, here, to start producing things. But learning and being able to have that ownership was huge in my life. So I probably would be like, here, use my iPhone to get a clip for your little video you're making for the family or for your friend or something. But it's always a difficult line to walk, because I know for me, you know, for the past few generations, my dad did better than his dad, and I'm doing better than him in terms of my access to technology. But how do we make it so that our kids don't have an experience that is too guided to the point where they can't learn like I learn, or they won't be able to have their own path in technology to figure out their own kind of lifestyle that they want. And as part of that, my wife and I decided, this was when we got married, we talked about this a lot. And it goes back to that seminary thing. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, I love this movie and I love that thing. Like, my wife and I, both of us knew we wanted to get married to someone, and we wanted to find out, is it you or someone else, you know? So we talked a lot about, with kids, our plans for tech and internet and things like that. Cause I didn't have the internet growing up until I was like, I don't know, 11, 12 or something. Sure. So we decided that until they're 13, we're not going to reference say that we have kids is fine, but we're not going to use their names. We're not going to use their pictures. None of that is going online, because we want the kids to have their own identity, not one that we made for them by throwing them up on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all that. And that's besides the fact of the privacy concerns with the fact that, you know, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those things probably have a full profile of entire children's life history and every toy that they've ever owned through facial recognition and toy recognition and things like that.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to prevent the social media stuff. Yeah. Because the other thing, I mean, how do you do it with extended family when they take pictures?
And that's the hard thing is, you know, our kids, we're all social creatures. So obviously the kids see, oh, she has an iPad and he has an iPad and everybody has an iPad nowadays. So how do we deal with that? And part of it is just continually telling them about, you know, why it is this way. We have a family iPad, but it's restricted, you know, you don't have unlimited time on it, things like that. And hoping for the best there. And it's also helpful that we have, there is a wide gamut in our family, but we do have very understanding friends and family who also, like, they know that their kids get this thing and our kids get this thing, and that they try to limit, like, when the Geerling kids are here, maybe don't spend your whole time doing this or playing on the Wii or doing this. Like, let's figure out some other activities and things. The pandemic also, in a weird way, it makes that easier because now we just don't see anybody. But at some point that'll go away and it'll be right back in the mix of things.
Yeah, for sure. So how about like mechanical engineering or electrical engineering? Have you dabbled with any of those things? Are you interested in that, like robotics or some of those bigger self-driving systems?
Yeah, not anything too big, and definitely not mechanical, because everything that I do mechanical ends up having really janky, broken behaviors, to the point where it's like every time I do something, like, that's embarrassing, I'm not going to try that again. I don't know. My like, I can see what I want, but I can't make it, it's kind of crazy and annoying. But I do some electronics work, and again, my dad's a radio engineer, so he taught me how to use a soldering iron, and he taught me how circuits work and that kind of stuff. And I was always fascinated by electronics and all that kind of stuff. So I still make some little custom circuits from time to time when I need something. And I've gotten a little bit into Arduino. And this year, one of my goals is to get a little deeper into it and start building some interesting devices. The first thing that I did for YouTube, well, it wasn't for YouTube, it was for a nonprofit, but I built a bell that reacts to emails. And I based it off someone else's work. That's, great artist steal or whatever that is. But I built a bell that when a certain email comes to a certain inbox for a donation, the bell would go off. And for version 2.0, I'm going to 3D print a case for it that's a little more robust, because right now it's literally a sharp piece of metal that if you touch, you'll get cut. So, but I do enjoy that kind of stuff. And I actually, because of that video and how fun that little project was, I bought a 3D printer, and now I'm like, I can do this and this and this, but it's like, first things first, I need to put together the 3D printer, and that could be an adventure on its own, because that gets into the mechanical side. And like I said, mechanical side, I'm not always the best at.
It's funny because I've heard people say the opposite side, where they're like really good mechanically, and then when they know what they want to do with software, but it's like it just can't happen. It's like the complete opposite to what you said.
Yeah. Well, the key is to find two people that are like me and that other person, put them together, and then you get something good. That's good. That's also where I'm hoping, like, my dad he's getting a little older, don't tell him I said that, but he's nearing retirement age. Like, it'd be really cool, I think, if he and I could work together on some projects that I've thought about in the past, and see where things end up. I don't expect that we'd go on Kickstarter or anything, but there are some fun things that I've thought about and that he's thought about, that it's like, the key would be having the good software and the good hardware, and getting those together, because there's so many things where the hardware is amazing, but the software just never rises up to the occasion. And, that's where, like, companies like Apple have that magic, because they have both. And a lot of companies just never get to that stage, or the software is amazing, but it just never had the right hardware to make it run really well.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I feel like YouTube's a good place to test all those things, right? Like, if you even wanted to put it into being an actual product, like you move to the Kickstarter stage after you do something on YouTube, or you're like Mark Rober or some of these other YouTubers where you just make random things and it's never really a product. It's more of something that you just keep internally, and it's just a fun thing, and it's a cool video. And
10 years we'll have Glitter Bomb 14.0.
Seriously. Yeah. I mean, that's where I'm kind of trying to go, is building stuff like that. But I think your point of, like, just finding someone who's really good with the mechanical, it is probably a smart way to go, at least to learn from them, if not just work directly with them. But you have the access to your dad. I don't have family members that do mechanical things like that at this point, but yeah. That's what I love about YouTube, though, because once you start doing all those things, I can just learn from what you guys have done, and then just try to apply it to myself, Yeah,
no, I've learned so much. Like I mentioned earlier, like, you don't, a YouTuber who comes up from what I was at 3,000 to 100,000 subscribers, it's not just oh, he just sits in front of a camera and talks and it happens. It's like, no, I've spent time figuring out like, how do I get views? And there's a lot of different ways to do it. And a lot of that is watching what other YouTubers do that's successful. It's just like any industry, you have to know your competitors, and other YouTubers aren't my competitors in a sense, but I do follow like, what are some other people that do Raspberry Pi things? Like, what are the successful ones and what are the not successful ones? And then figure out, is it titles and keywords and thumbnails? And it all comes down to what's the content. But I have found a lot of very successful people that don't have the best content. Like, it's like, oh, this is cringy, I just can't watch it. But they still get 20 times more views than I could ever imagine getting. So
yeah, there's some mixture there that's with certain celebrities, right? I mean, YouTube celebrities, or I guess traditional celebrities. It's hard to pinpoint what is it about them that makes them so successful. I don't know if it's a worthwhile thing. I think for us, it's a matter of producing the best content we can consistently, and then being avidly trying to improve it over time. And I'm trying to do a better job of collaborating with others. So, I mean, if there's projects that you're like, oh, I would love to have some web application help or something like that, let me know. I would love to collaborate more with you, because I really like what you're doing. I think you're helping a lot of people, myself included. So definitely keep me in mind for future projects. And are there YouTubers that you watch now that you're like, wow, people really should check these people out?
Yeah, well, there's I don't know even where it came from, but the Make Stuff Here channel, I forget what the guy's name is who does that. Like, that popped onto my radar.
Stuff Made Here, is it that one?
Stuff Made Here. That's it. Yeah,
with the basketball hoop and
yes, like that is like, how does he come up with these things? Like that channel is just, he's like on God mode this year with all the little projects he's done. And it's like, if I had unlimited budget, unlimited time, those are some things that I'd be like, man, that'd be fun to do. So absolutely. Like him and Colin Furs are two people who have that spirit of, I had this idea and it sounds ridiculous, but also possible. And let's see if it happens, and then, that for everything that they've done that has a success, there's also some failure. And that's one thing that it's a hard line to walk, to talk about your failure with your successes, because not only does it hurt your ego a little bit, but that's where some of the best learning comes from sometimes. And I also like how some of those types of channels kind of go into the failure modes and the rework that they had to do and things like that. So those are some of the things that I love. Also, just some of the things that I enjoy watching for no other reason than it's just pure fun to watch and learn about how other people's brains works, is like AVE. I don't know if you've heard of his channel. He's like, I guess like a mechanical engineer. I don't know what his original job or current job is, but he takes apart things and puts them back together, and he dissects industrial equipment and all this kind of stuff. It's a random YouTube channel that I found a few years ago, and I was like, man, like he knows a lot. He's not quite safe for work all the time in his language, but
sure,
that's one difference he has with my dad. But it has that spirit that my dad kind of had and still has, is, how can I make this thing? What makes this thing tick? What are good things about it? What are bad things about it? That kind of stuff. So
AV. Actually, I think I have seen this channel.
Yeah.
If you like people breaking things apart and better understanding it, Jeremy Felding, have you seen his YouTube at all?
I'm not subscribed. I've probably seen it. That rings a bell.
He does stuff like he salvages old washing machines, takes the motor out, and uses that for like a drill press, the actual motor from it. So he's building drill presses for like, $30, and it's normally a $2,000-$3,000 machine or something. Really, really interesting. It kind of reminds me of that. I guess like Jeremy and Shane from the Stuff Made Here. Those guys are like part of the reason I want to get more into the mechanical things, because of the cool stuff that they're building. I mean, Jeremy's so much of like these just clever mechanical things, Whereas Shane, he builds the software mechanical mixture that it's like you can just see what you can build with those things, and it's super exciting, especially if you mix in more of the artificial intelligence, deep learning type things as well. You know.
Yeah, on that theme, but like completely opposite too, is Matthias Wendell, I forget his actual name. He does woodworking, but it's in my brain, like the process is where it is. Like he's always learning a new way to build something out of wood, and he has a wood shop that most people would die for. And half of the tools he built himself. Like he's built himself like 4 bandsaws all out of wood.
Wow, that's crazy.
All kinds of awesome little things that he does. And he documents the whole process, and he uses a Raspberry Pi to do time lapses. And he built like a custom little software application to help him manage all the time lapses because he's always doing projects.
Oh, that's awesome. You know what I'd love to have is a robotic arm built through a Raspberry Pi that does my camera work. And like literally is a cameraman and does better angles and like maybe moves around my studio and all that. Please make that someday, somebody out there.
What is it? Iron Man, Tony Stark had the little
exactly that. Yes, I want to be like Iron Man. Maybe not the suit. I don't. The weirdest thing that I never understood about that is why is he actually in the suit?
Well, like, he remedied that later on, but still, yeah. I think it's just to be cool. Like, honestly, it would be cool to have a suit like that.
True. I was, this is definitely off topic and I don't want to get political, but what happened in Congress recently, a couple days ago, I just thought, what if Iron Man just landed in front of there and just like everyone dispersed? Like my wife looks at me and is like, "You are such a nerd." I'm like, yeah, but it's true. I mean, that would happen. Like people would be freaking out, you know? So I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, not to get political, people have their reasons to do the things that they do. I think. Cool. Well, thanks for those channels. I got to check those guys out. There's another guy who I think it's I Like to Make Stuff, which does a lot of woodworking stuff as well. He, I think he was a software engineer for a really long time and then stopped doing that and just started making things, all sorts of things, mostly woodworking, I would say. But this is like what I think is so fascinating about YouTube, and hopefully this gives your wife some confidence as well. Is like YouTube has the potential to reach people like that. I think Shane at Stuff Made Here, he had like maybe 100,000 subscribers at the beginning of 2020. Now he's got like 1.3 million, and he's just on his way in so many ways. I mean, and YouTube has that potential, which is like so exciting about it. It's just a matter of finding your audience and your niche, and I think you're well on your way there. So congratulations with all that, and I'm looking forward to seeing things grow and maybe having you back and chatting again in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
So thanks, Jeff. Thanks again for coming out. I know I want to be respectful of time and I got to get going. So yeah, I mean, good luck with everything and hope to talk soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.